Dr. Siebert.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Today we're going to talk about a critical subject. I believe this subject is it's a real maybe it's a real reason for atheism. Like when atheists talk about they don't believe of God because scientific thing or because some ancient stuff, there is no real evidence for it. It's all wishy-washy. We can't debate this. We can debate it very easily. But when we come to Theodicy, here is a real subject. We need to talk about it. Yeah. So can first of all tell us what Theodicy means?
Yeah, first of all, Theodicy is of course in our lives, our daily lives. We have every 2 weeks we have a mass murder. This morning again, today on August 26th, I think, 2 journalists have been killed on air, being on air. A young woman, 24 years old, so we can expect that every 2 weeks there will be a mass murder. Yesterday I thought, maybe it will not happen this time, but this morning at 6 o'clock on a mall in Virginia, 2 young people are shot again. So these are contingency problems, sometimes they are called, or you can call them Theodicy problems. And it's the question, why me? Why does that happen to us? And so on.
Why evil exists.
Yeah, well, why, yeah, but more personal, why does that cancer happen to me? Like my wife up there, mother of 8 children, and suddenly 47 years old, gets cancer and disappears. And then people say, well, time will heal, but it doesn't. And they say, well, there's a reason for everything, but it isn't. So that is very personal. It's a very personal thing, and it is something for nations, why that happens in Vietnam, why that happens in Iraq, and so on, where so many, or Syria, where so many, 250,000 people or so have died. So this is an unbelievable problem which we have every day. Now the word theodicy, theos is Greek and means God, and dikē means justice. So it is a question of God's justice in the face of the injustices in His world, because He created this world, He is the governor of this world, and it happens in His world. And so theodicy is then the attempt to defend God's justice in spite of all these injustices which are happening. Like this morning, this woman was engaged, she wanted to get married and so on, and suddenly the 8 shots ring out and she is dead and so on. So that is a very personal, concrete type of a thing. And so you have to defend God. Why does that happen in your word? So that is the theodicy problem.
So the question is, what believer, how believer defend God?
Yeah, but if you are not a believer, you still have problems. We have secular theodicies. Marx is a secular theodicy. It becomes a science of human suffering. What is the reason for human suffering? And Marx says private property is the reason for all the suffering. Or Freud, you would ask, what is the reason for all suffering? And he would say, it is the killing of the father. That is where all neuroses are come from. And all these people who do the shooting, they are really neurotics and they are mentally ill. And so that is where all the suffering comes from. So you have originally, of course, the religious theodicy. And I think religious people didn't call it that way for a long time. It was there. So if a Catholic goes to confession today and he would say, as I did once, I came out of the civil war in Croatia and Yugoslavia, and I found a priest there, and I told him I have a problem. I just came, from that slaughter there. Also 200,000 people were killed there in this conflict. And so I said, where's your boss, where is your God in all of this? And he didn't understand the word there, in spite of the fact that he had theology and so on. But then he talked about Christ and his suffering and so on. He knew very well what was meant. So sometimes people don't use the word, but they have the thing in itself. Right. The question of this immense suffering. And we had, of course, the word came up by Leibniz, the great mathematician and thinker Leibniz. He wrote 2 volumes about the theodicy in a positive way. He thought that this was the best of all possible worlds. And then Voltaire laughed him out of court with his little piece in which he attacked him and made fun of him, and it is still played now sometimes, today on the stage. So so that, and then the philosopher Hegel, the great teacher of Marx, he had a positive theodicy still.
What do you mean by positive theodicy?
A positive where you can justify God. So Hegel would say that if you see all these negative things happening, you can wallow in that negativity. Some people do that. But you can also go to the beginning. Reason governs the world. God governs the world. Providence governs the world. And then you will understand that no matter what bad things happen, they will not prevent God from reaching his ultimate goal, the realm of freedom and so on. He can even turn the negative, he negates the negation. So it is not that it justifies the evil things which happened, the killing this morning and so on, but it means in spite of the fact that these evil things happen, God's reason will prevail, his power will prevail, and therefore the ultimate goal will be reached.
So they move the debate from the God existence about the God plan, let's say.
Yeah,
so he has
yes,
some plans.
right. So he says, when you see all these negative things, don't wallow in it, but go to the beginning of the whole thing, namely God's creation, his providence, his plan, his purpose. And no matter what bad things happen, it's not that God justifies bad things. That would be blasphemy. God cannot do this. But that he can even negate those negative things, can even make them into means against the will of the murderers, can make it into something positive which serves the ultimate purpose. And then you have, of course, Schopenhauer, who laughs about this and talks about Hegel's cursed optimism and so on. And so in the meantime, you have a situation in which no world religion has a theoretical answer to the theodicy problem, but they still have a practical answer. Namely, in Islam, would say submission to God's will. And then you go on and you carry whatever happens to you. Or in Christianity, you can follow Christ, or the Greek religion, you follow Socrates or whatever. And even Nazis, fascists, have a new way to die. In the West, people died either like Jesus or like the Socrates. Now they have this heroic death, where you don't die slowly from cancer in a hospital or so, but with many others together. Like Hitler did in Berlin, or like this Lufthansa pilot recently did, who takes the airplane down into the Alps, and so on. So prepared it all, But he had some illness, and so he took all these people with him. So that is, in a big fantastic type, like Wagner's operas, where you have this type of a dramatic type of a death. So people still have sometimes a practical way to deal with suffering, but theoretically, no world religion has any answer to it at this moment. And that is very dangerous, because religions move or develop and bloom or fall with the answer to the theodicy problem on a certain level of evolution. That means a certain level of learning. So when they can answer this question satisfactorily, then they go up in the world, But if they don't have an answer anymore, then they begin to move into a crisis, and they may recover, or they may also die. There are a lot of dead religions, The Persian religion is dead, the Egyptian religion is dead, the Greek religion is dead, the Roman religion is dead, and so on. They all have died, because at a certain point the gods could not answer the question anymore. Why does that happen to me, or why does that happen to our nation? So therefore the theodicy problem is a matter of life and death for the world religions.
So who can judge? Like he say, okay, this is a valid answer, and the other one he say, okay, this is not valid, because it's something personal. Like this answer will satisfy him, the other one will not satisfy.
Right. I mean, this is the American way, that everything is personal, but there are some more objective things. So the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, had certain theodicy solutions in common. So the most popular one, which is all over the place, is the retaliation, let's call it the retaliation theodicy. That means when something bad happens, that must be because of secret sins which people have. So you did something bad. Therefore, Antigone, for instance, says, from how much we suffer, we know how much we have sinned. So in the Greek religion of fate and beauty, you have this Antigone position where theodicy means the suffering is the result of human sin.
Yeah,
and that goes very far, and we have it in the Abrahamic religions
this
too.
is in the prophets, I believe. He say God punishing them for their sins, God doing this
Right.
to his people in order to get them back to him.
Right, yeah. So now, you ask, how do we know objectively or whatever? Now, if you take this solution and you apply it to Auschwitz, for instance, can you really say that these 6 million people were a Holocaust, which means a burnt suffering for their sins, I mean, the people who were killed, let's say the 6 million, which is a Nazi number, were killed. These were not the people whom Hitler blamed. He thought of Jewish high finance, Rothschild from Frankfurt, who are now in Paris and so on. They made a tremendous profit from the First World War and so on. And so Hitler predicted all the time, if the Jewish high finance will once more bring the European nations into a world war, it will not be the end of Europe, but it will be the end of the Jewish people. And he repeated that 3 times. And then when the war became international in Pearl Harbor, when he declared war to the United States because of Japan, then it became a world war. And at that moment, also the annihilation of the Jews started. So in order to do what he said, namely what will end is not Europe, what will end is the Jewish people. So that was behind it. But you see, can you really say now that these 6 million Jews died for their sins? They were working class Jews, they were low middle class Jews. They had nothing to do with the high finance. Nobody reasonable, there's no rabbi today who would use that theodicy. You cannot repeat it anymore. You cannot teach it to your children anymore.
So this can tell us, okay, how he can satisfy what's mentioned in the Hebrew Bible about people get punished for their sins. How he punish? He say, okay, this is not the word of God, or how he do it?
Well, I mean, that is the question now. What we have is a crisis. That means Judaism, with this theodicy, that's not the only one they have, but with this retaliation theodicy, that cannot be used any longer. So
it's not valid. Huh? It's not valid reasoning.
Well, it means now what to do, with all these. It's not the only verse there. I mean, it goes deep into Christianity. Christ dies for the sins of the world, because the sins of the world made God angry, and therefore God will all send him into hell, and then comes Christ and redeems everybody, and we don't have to go into hell anymore. So it is still underlying the whole Christian idea. So therefore, whoever believes this, whoever holds on to that type of explanation, theodicy, this theodicy has become shaky. There's only one rabbi who says that the sins have produced that. So, for instance, when this big flood happened, which killed 200,000 people, the tsunami, he would say that those 12 nations which did not recognize Israel, they were responsible. So their sin was responsible for these dead people and so on. But it was only one rabbi, and he was one who was a heretic, because he took from India the reincarnation idea. So that it went not only the living people's sin, but also the sins of those who they were before. Okay. These sins are also important. So what we can say objectively now is, if nobody can say that these 6 million Jews died because of their sins or the sins of their fathers or whatever, then we cannot use this theodicy answer anymore.
In Book of Job, he say people who do what God wants will suffer more.
Yeah, but see, Job is another theodicy. It's a second theodicy answer, which also Jews, Christians, and Muslims have in common.
Something like this.
So therefore you have to ask, how valid is this now? that is the test theodicy, right? So when something bad happens, God tests us. But if you apply that again to reality, and you say, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 74,000 people in one city and as many in the other city and so on. Suddenly on August 8th at 8 o'clock in the morning comes one airplane without any real warning, throws this parachute down and radiates, annihilates a whole city and so on. Can you really say that was a test? Who was tested? The nuns, the little children who took their breakfast out? Was Tippett tested, the pilot, who is still alive and thinks he has not done anything wrong? There was the other pilot tested who committed suicide. Was the other pilot tested who became a monk, a Trappist monk, and I visited him down in Virginia once in the 50s. So, or the pilot, there was another one who became insane. So he died recently in an insane asylum from cancer. But all what he did was he wrote letters around the world, do never do such a horrendous crime again, and so on. But who was really tested, So because, there was a priest, an army priest, Polish army priest in the American army, and he put holy water on the first bomb. And then he heard about the results, and he put holy water on the second bomb. So that means you have a religion who even blesses this thing, which is horrifying. The priest later on said he was brainwashed by the army and he converted and became a peace man later on, but much, much later, yeah. So nevertheless, what I want to say is the first theodicy answer that suffering is punishment for sin, and the second one, punishment is a test. Both of them cannot stand up to the experience of modern people.
So let's go to the third one, book of Daniel. He said, forces of evil is control the world. Again, it's the honest people. Forces of evil.
Right. There is a third answer, which the three Abrahamic religions have all together. And that is an eschatological one, a messianic one. So all three have that in common. The Messiah will come for the Jewish people. And then he will establish a realm of peace. And those things like murder this morning, that will not happen anymore. There will be no stealing anymore, like Wall Street, maybe. There will be no killing anymore, like Pentagon. There will be no lying anymore, like Congress and so on. It will be a realm of peace. And in Christianity, the Messiah has come already, but he will return again. And for Islam, the Messiah will come, and it will even be the Jesus Messiah after Ali appears and so on. So
it's part of Muslims.
Right.
Some Muslims, they don't believe in this. They believe there is no Messiah.
In Christianity, you have that too. Yeah. So, or the Messiah is not a person; it's a messianic age, and so on. So, but all three of them have some kind of an eschatology. And Iran, I think, for instance, they have even an apocalyptic one, where you need a big chaos before the Messiah appears, and so on. So. But that is also a theodicy solution, right? The problem is only that the Jews now have waited already for 2,800 years. The Christians have waited for 2,000 years, and the Muslims have waited for 1,400 years, and nothing has come, right? And out of this comes a solution, and the solution is mysticism. So you have, the Sufis in Islam. You have mystics also in Judaism and Christianity, and mysticism appears exactly because of the parousia delay. That means because of the delay, optimistically, the delay of the Messiah not coming. So therefore, the mystic wants to have unity with Yahweh, unity with Allah, and so on, already now. And it is the mystic himself who has then to do what the Messiah is supposed to do, namely to establish peace and justice, and so on. And then from mysticism, it is only another step into the bourgeois enlightenment, in the socialistic enlightenment, in the Freudian enlightenment. Namely, if the Messiah, does only have to put his name under what people have done already, it's not so important if he comes or not. We have to do it all. And so you have the bourgeois enlighteners, fraternité, égalité, and so on. We can do that ourselves. And then come the socialists who say the bourgeoisie didn't do it, we have to do it, right? And then come the Freudian people who say it is all psychological and we have to at least to somehow overcome the horror in the environment, in ourselves, our killer instinct and so on. So then we can somehow eke out or establish some kind of a cultivated environment around us so that we don't have another mass murder every 2 weeks.
So what do you think about the solution of atheists? They say, okay, there is no God,
Yeah.
there is no justice, we just evolved.
Yeah,
It is
okay.
what it is.
I mean, the classical guy, I brought that with me here. The classical guy is Epicure, the materialist and atheist, of antiquity, the Greek thinker.
Okay.
And he plays an important role for Karl Marx and his enlightenment and his revolution. And he sums it up in a beautiful way, which I cannot even remember. That's why I have to read it. So, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. That is one quality taken away from the absolute.
Mm-hmm.
Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. That means if the God punishes 6 million Jews, he is a monstrosity.
Mm-hmm.
If God somehow tests people in Japan, and lets them all die, that is a monstrosity. So that's what he means.
Mm-hmm.
Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence comes evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? So there you have it summed up, and I think he anticipated all the others.
Okay.
So I think the best...
What do you think about this solution? Like, okay, at the end, I believe because of this, I believe there is no God. It is what it is. Let's just live our life. And
yeah, right. So, I mean, the great writer, Roman writer Tacitus, observed that the Germanic tribesmen were without fear of the gods. So you're not afraid of God's judgment anymore or whatever, and you can do whatever you want to do. Mm-hmm. Hegel then said the same thing about the bourgeois enlightenment. He said all these third estate people, all these shopkeepers and so on, that's the bourgeois revolution, they got rid of all the fears of, not the gods now, but the fear of God, and therefore everything goes, that is one possibility. But it's not the only possibility, because atheists may develop their own ethics, a secular type of ethics. And since the philosopher Kant, the greatest enlightener, you have this attempt to establish ethics without any theology or without any theodicy neither, because theodicy is the beginning of theology. See, theology was first of all theodicy, like we have it with Epicure and so on, either positive or negative, So, but only as theology went on, they forgot the theodicy question. They didn't want to talk about them anymore. So you have books today which say we do have to talk about it, People like to repress the theodicy question and not ask because it's so uncomfortable and they don't have a theoretical answer to it.
so, is there no real, till today, there is no real answer. It's just, you think it's just maybe theories or opinion, and some people can accept it, and some people cannot. This is the...
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you cannot have a scientific type of an atheism after Immanuel Kant, right? Because he made clear that analytical understanding, which is underlying your engineering and all our sciences, cannot transcend the senses, my eyes, my ears, and so on. So therefore, I cannot prove scientifically theism, nor can I prove scientifically atheism. When I taught in the Soviet time, in the Soviet Union, the Soviet countries, I saw many of these atheists who had become agnostics already. And that is a much more adequate answer. They would say, okay, the methodology of myself as an engineer, as a medical doctor, and so on, as a physicist or chemist or so, my methodology does not reach beyond my experiments and experience, and therefore I cannot say anything about the absolute or the unconditional. So, and the Immanuel Kant, even forbid scientists or analytical understanding to enter the realm of the thing in itself, which is God, freedom and immortality, because there the mind just gets confused. People get into what he called antinomies, they get into contradictions of all kinds and don't get anywhere. So science has to limit itself to the realm of experience and not going beyond it. And then he went back, to the Mosaic law, the second and the third commandment, not to make images of the absolute and not to name the absolute even. So, and that is what an atheist, of course, does. An atheist is a very extreme type of fellow who is obedient to the second and the third commandment. That means he denies all images or all names or whatever. So, but agnosticism is a better way, because if Kant is right, then no scientists can say anything by limitation of his method about the absolute. So therefore it says, I don't know what it is,
So the other question, there are some theists, but they are not believer. They not believer in religion. But they theists, they believe there is some kind of supernatural, there is some kind of God, but is not this God. He did never send any of the religion prophets.
Yeah.
Do they have any kind of explanation for Theodicy?
Well, you have, of course, deism, right? And so deism is really the public religion of this civil religion in this country, So it was established by Rousseau and Voltaire. They are the inventor of deism. So deism was necessary. When you make a revolution, you have to free yourself from the religion which legitimates the people you want to overthrow. So in order to overthrow the Catholic king, Louis XVI, and his Austrian wife, and the Dauphin, they had to change the religion, Catholicism. So they replaced Catholicism by deism.
Okay.
And deism means that God has created the world, and you still have in the Declaration of Independence, you have God mentioned there, not in the Constitution. There is no God in the Constitution, but the Declaration of Independence, that is this deistic God who has created the world, but then he has left the world. And therefore, the world is for all practical reason atheistic, without God, and God is wordless. That is practically our situation. And this had different functions, this bourgeois teaching of deism. First of all, it was an answer to the tsunami in Portugal, where by 1750 or so, where a tsunami hit Lisbon, and it was a horrible catastrophe, and it gave a tremendous theodicy shock to all of Europe. As far as the faith community is concerned. How can something like this happen in a world which is created by God and governed by God and so on? So therefore, deism was an answer to this, You cannot blame God because he's not here.
He's away,
Yeah.
But it does make sense to me.
It had another function, namely, this God was also not a lawgiver. So you could now have colonialism without any problems of conscience or whatever. You could exploit other people's oil or whatever. You could take rubber from Vietnam. You could take coffee from El Salvador. You could take oil from Iraq. And you didn't have to bother. You didn't have to be afraid of a God. He was gone. He had withdrawn into himself and left the world to itself. So this deism, had very important functions for some Europeans, but also for the American Constitution. So I have many students who say we don't want to depend on providence. We have to work hard. It depends on us. We don't want to pray, because we have to do it all ourselves and so on. Self-dependence, that is all going back to the deistic solution, which is very important for this republic. And for our constitution, and for our whole way of life.
But for the believer, like a personal, one person, it makes no sense. Like if there is a real God and he created this world and then left, and he did not really look all this problem, all this pain, all this evil in the world, what kind of God this? It's very bad.
Yeah.
And
so,
if this God have no plan,
yeah.
have no heaven, have nothing, is...
So therefore you have that split in this country, and you have these daily culture wars, you know, because on one side you have the enlightened people, the secular people, who follow the Constitution, who follow the civil rights, the human rights declarations. Think of the homosexual issue, you know. The homosexual issue has no basis in Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. It's hopeless. Mm-hmm. But it is argued on the basis of the Human Rights Declaration, the bourgeois revolution, and so on, where it says we are all equal. We are first of all human, then we are sexual beings, then we are believers or whatever. As human beings, we are all equal, and therefore we have the equal right to get married and so on. And that is how you now have 18 states which have this marriage. Marriage makes no sense because marriage is productive. All homosexual relationships are sterile. So the name marriage does not really fit, but it's a union, it's a civil union, right? But this cannot be argued on the religious side, it can only be argued on the secular side.
So this is the question, like right now we talk about God himself, about if there's God with a plan or God without a plan, or there's no God. How come when we talk about these subjects, always the talk come to talk about state, law, constitution, why is that? Like why we always have this connection?
Yeah.
This is out of the subject, but I noticed that when I talk about God, maybe whatever, if there's God, there's no God, there's God with a plan, or there's God without, he just left. That talk is come out, and we start talking about government and states for some reason. Why is that? It's something personal to believe or not.
Yeah. Well, but it is not only personal. You see, think of Islam. Islam is holistic, you know. So the whole struggle, I think, against modernity in the Near East, and against the modern Enlightenment, the bourgeois Enlightenment, and so on, I think it all comes from this, that, let's say, the separation of church and state. I go back to this again, because it has consequences, you see. If you separate church and state, you make religion into a private affair, you know. If you make it a private affair, then you say, religion should stay out of my family life, birth control or whatever.
If I don't believe in religion. If I believe, let's religion come to my life, you know.
Well, let's think they are believers in the Near East, and they are threatened by Western modernity and civilization and so on, with the separation of Ummah and state or whatever, and they say, you know, I have to live out my religion in my family life, in civil society with my job, in the state, in the historical process, in the whole culture and so on. You cannot write the satanic verses or whatever, you know, in which you use art and you use religion in the wrong way or so. Because in the East there is no differentiation yet between art and religion. So you cannot do this, what this artist did in London, you know. And then Iran wanted to kill him. They don't want to kill him anymore now, but he still has to be protected. And
and this make no sense, because based on Quran itself, God ordered Prophet Muhammad to turn his face from people who try to make fun of him. He told him, just leave them.
Yeah.
So don't order him to kill them or something like that.
Right, yeah. Well, that is a specific issue, you know, which we have now in France and everywhere. That means the First Amendment, you know, of freedom of speech and so on. But this is also on the secular side. See, secular people have developed that. But the freedom of speech has limits. So what happens sometimes with the bourgeois Enlightenment is that they absolutize a right. They think it's valid all the time, but it isn't. You cannot go into a room full of people and can say fire, fire, or whatever. You'll be punished for it, right? And so if you know that it hurts Islamic people in Brussels or in Paris or whatever, if you put Muhammad into a magazine or put a bomb on his head or whatever in Denmark or whatever, then you have to stop that, you know. Even now we have this, you know, the South Koreans, you know, they have this loudspeakers and they shout it to the north, you know, and they had to stop it, and they stopped it now, right? There are certain limits where you cannot express yourself. But that is something, you know, which belongs to the secular side again.
But maybe this is also, let's talk about this.
But let's just take up that point which you had before about that it is a private thing, you know. You are a modern person already when you say it's a private one. The religious people want that their religion permeates their whole life, their job. I have a son who works in a corporation. They pray 3 times a day so that the business will go well, you know. My son doesn't like that very much. He says, you have to hard work. That's how you get sales, you know. And I told him, why not both? And that was completely new to him, that one could have both. He thought, you know, there are these people who are praying and there's no effects, so you have to do the modern thing, work hard, you know, don't depend on God's providence or whatever. But why not do both together? Why not to reconcile these positions?
There's a lot of talk, even in Muslim countries, even in Middle East itself, about whatever the Islam have a system to government, to govern the people or not. So this is, and there's a lot of talk. So not all Muslims believe that, suppose the state and mosque or church or whatever to be together. There's a lot of debate.
Yeah.
But let's talk about pictures, since you mentioned. And those people, when they wrote picture about Prophet Muhammad, because maybe they just saw the terrorist activities from out of Muslims. Like the other Muslims should stand up and also fight the terrorism more, reject the terrorism.
Yeah.
So people at least say, okay, some of people who follow Muhammad have different idea. So we cannot really make a picture of him the way we did. So the way to stop those people, I believe, is the Muslims' responsibility is to show that their prophet is not really this guy. It's not by telling him, okay, just stop. This is not an answer, because he will still believe inside him that Muhammad is a bad guy.
Yeah.
So to tell someone to stop, it's not really the correct way to do it.
Right.
We need.
So I mean, what it needs is a discourse between the two sides, and each of them has to understand the other side. So the secular person who is emphasizing that First Amendment right, he has to see that there is a community of people who relate this second commandment of Moses not to make images of the absolute, you know, who take that very seriously. Somehow Muhammad is the messenger, he is close to Allah, and therefore it goes into the sacred sphere, and therefore these images should not be produced at all, not only funny images, no images whatsoever. You don't have Muhammad in the mosque, you know, in the Sunni mosque or the Shiite mosque. The Jewish people don't have Moses standing there. In the Catholic Church you have Jesus standing there. That's another story, you know. But Judaism and Islam are very strict on the second commandment of Moses, that you cannot make images of the sacred, certainly not of God, but also things which may be related to him. And so the secular people have to respect, have to recognize that this is something very holy for the religious people. And then the religious people, if they live in France, you know, in a modern secular republic and so on, they must also know, you know, what the Western Enlightenment means, and that it is not created by evil people, that there was a reason why the West separated church and state, because the religious people in the West killed each other as they do now in the Near East, and the only way to deal with this was to take religion out of the state and put it into civil society and make it into a private affair. Still communities, but still private communities, and that is how it is in the States, and that is how in all modern republics. And the question is in the Near East, if that is not also the only way, you know, to overcome the civil wars in the Near East.
And there's many people call for that right now.
Yeah, right.
Because this
so
is the
religions can learn from each other. See, that's very important. So maybe our Islamic brothers and sisters can learn something from the Catholics here and the Protestants. They fought each other, you know, between 16 to 46 or whatever. They butchered every village of the continent, you know. They have forgotten this today, you know. They talk about ISIS beheading people. They have forgotten how many people they have beheaded, you know. There was not one village in Europe which was intact when the Westphalian peace was established. So it was the bourgeoisie, the third estate, and their revolution which finally did the separation of church and state, and was able somehow to, you know, to overcome that civil war situation. But we still had it in France with the Huguenots, where I'm coming from. They were my ancestors, you know, who were butchered in the Bartholomew's night and then had to flee to Germany, and my ancestor did this, you know. So there was still a civil war in France. So in Ireland we had still things. So
Yes.
it's sometimes flaming up again here and there, you know. But overall, the separation of church and state was able to settle this. Here in the States, we took the Anglican Church out of the state. We have no state church. We put them into civil society and called them the Episcopalians. And they don't have the king anymore as their head, but you know, a group of bishops. So I think that maybe religions can learn from their own suffering, you know.
And why they need to invite the wheel again? Since it's already been tested, it's already...
it's another civilization, and they, you know, have to apply it to their own specific circumstances, right?
Exactly, yeah. Have to adapt
their own history, right?
Yeah. So let's return back to Theodicy. The Islam, as I see it, have its own answer for Theodicy. Basically, if we read Quran, that we see the evil, let's say it's evil, and the good, it's equal. There is no real evil. You think it's Quran, when he was talking to Prophet Muhammad, he tell him, you think it's evil. It's all same. It's all way again to test. It's all ways to see how you're gonna react to my plan. Are you really trust me or not? Are you really love me and believe on me or not? It's all same, because even if I give you money, if I give you health, I will see how you gonna act, how you gonna use this money, how you gonna use this health. If you use it in bad way, you will lose at the end. If I give you a disease, if I give you a cancer, if I give you some bad thing happen to you, again, it's a way to test, to see how you are gonna react. Are you gonna just stop trusting me and loving me, or you will continue? And it's only a small period of time again.
Right.
So this is what I believe Islam say. Okay, there is no evil. Things is all same. If I give you money, or I give you, if I became poor, it's all same. It's all a small period of time, just to see how you are gonna react. Then there is a reward anyway for it.
Yeah, I mean the trust theodicy, as we call that, you know, is deeply rooted in Judaism. You have it in Job, you know, and you have it in Jesus too. It's also a theodicy.
And it's both. So here it's like it's people who sins, people who don't sins. In Quran, in both, all people, because some people are not really believe, because they're conditioned, like they live in village in Brazil or something, they don't know nothing about Judaism, about Jesus, maybe about Islam. So how can God will enter them to heaven, or or it's based on their action? So again, this theodicy is for all, whatever they believe or not.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. Now you know, you have to go through this test of. Empirical test of what people really experience, and then you have to ask the question, you know, did these 6 million Jews die for a lack of trust in God? You know, where they did not, or where they tested, and so on. You have to ask with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was that a test? You have to go, you know, with my wife, was that a test for me, and so on. Can it stand up? Can it stand up in terms of these experiences?
And here some people say, okay, there's two reasons for this. Like for people in Germany, the Jews in Germany, is because of free will, it's not God himself. Because again, if God come and intervene in each time there's someone try to kill someone, there is no more pain, and there is no more test, there is no more free will, there is nothing there. And about the natural, like tsunami, these people say this is not about the free will. Free will cannot really answer the tsunami, right? So it's something that they call it is natural evil or something like this. So again, when it's happened, it's not test to those people who get killed. It's test to me and you.
Yeah, that's part of it. But the question is still, you know, can this belief, this test type of theodicy, when you really bring it down, you know, first of all, you know, one cannot deal lightly with sin or with evil. Like this morning, you know, you have a 24-year-old woman and another guy, her photographer, and they are just shot, and she screams and runs away, and she's still killed. When you see it concretely, there is evil. We have in Christianity also attempt, that evil is just a lack of goodness or something like that.
Exactly.
So one has to be very careful, and they have both Aristotle in the background, Muslims and Christians and so on. So one has to see that one doesn't do what Schopenhauer calls the cursed optimism and so on. If you look at Hitler, and I lived under him, I was in the German Air Force and so on. So I was in the German army, and I was supposed to go to Russia, The Germans killed 27 million Russians, not only 6 million Jews, but 27 million so-called communists and so on. They marched in with 4 million men, and butchered every village, If you think today in Moscow they are somewhat skeptical about your Europeans too, you have to remember what they went through. They had Napoleon coming with 900,000 men and marching to Moscow, They have Hitler coming in. And before Hitler, they had 12 capitalistic nations who attacked in the 20s, So this experience, this theodicy, this experience of evil, are very powerful in the memory of people. When I was in the Yugoslavia, people in Serbia, I was in the capital, they said, now the day has come when we can take revenge for the Battle of the Valley of the Blackbirds, which had taken place in the 14th century. They still remembered what the Turks did to them in the 14th century. So, evil has its own power, and I wouldn't say substance or whatever, but I think we have in the 20th century and 21st, we have learned, how real evil and how terrible it is, and how annihilating. So I think one has to take it seriously. Sometimes my Islamic students in tests, write, well, we all have to die. This is an easy sentence. It's very abstract, If it's your mother and eaten up by cancer, it becomes very, very different. And so on. So, what we said from the very beginning, we want to take those theodicy, all three of them, So the retaliation theodicy and the test theodicy and the eschatological one, which is the most impressive one if the Messiah would really come, So there is this waiting period, and because of which the mystics appeared, and because of which we have secular people and secular enlightenment and so on, that comes out of the disappointment that the Messiah has not come, and that is also to be taken very seriously.
And even some people in Islam say, like about the state and government, say we should not establish any state until the Messiah comes.
Yeah.
So we have to stay away from state because we will not succeed anymore.
And you are aware that these things are very dangerous, because if in Jerusalem, for instance, there are fringe groups in the Knesset too, who think that before the third temple will be built, with all the sacrifice and the priesthood and so on, as it was in the year 70, then the Messiah cannot come, then they may go into that tunnel and blow up the temple and so on. We have a major catastrophe. So one has to be very careful and very critical and very reasonable. So it's faith and reason which have to be worked. Reason and faith, both of it.
Nice, yep.
So because all the Christians' pogroms against the Jewish people, where the Jews were persecuted every Good Friday. They were raped and burnt down and so on.
Why is that?
In Russia, in Germany, in Spain, in Portugal, everywhere. You see why? Because the Jews killed Jesus.
That's it.
And when Jesus was God, then they killed God. They were the God killers, And then they, there were other economic things which came to it, but they were mainly religious. They did not convert, and if they did not convert, the Messiah could not come. The Jews had to be converted first. So
does Hitler believe in this?
That's what they believed. So the whole Middle Ages and into modernity,
Okay.
So therefore, these pogroms, this horrible. Now Hitler didn't believe in all that anymore. He translated into biological categories. The Jews were simply like in my tree. They're parasites. And suck out the blood of the Aryan or European nations and so on. So it became a secular type of thing. You wouldn't use that anymore, He thought Jesus was a great man, but a great man could not be a Jew, so therefore he had to try not to make Jesus a Jew any longer. And so he took the Talmud, Talmud, there's a story that Mary was a prostitute, and that she had a galleon soldier in the Roman army, but that made Jesus only half Aryan. But half Aryan was better than no Aryan, and so therefore that was behind the Nazi thing.
When he was talking like this, did people believe him, because this to me is very silly.
I mean, first of all, he believed it. He followed Julian Apostata, who was an emperor who was a Christian but wanted to go back to paganism. So he wanted to teach everybody to be like Julian Apostata, and he wanted to do the same thing, to bring all the, whatever. It's not entirely clear what he would have done, but he was very anti-Christian in the end of his life. He thought that Christianity was the Bolshevism in the Roman Empire and had destroyed the Roman Empire. He learned that from Gibbon, a historian of the 18th century. And so that, and he thought that the Bolshevists whom he was fighting at the Eastern Front, that they were the heirs of Judaism and Christianity and proposed equality. He believed very strongly that inequality was necessary for the survival of the human species, and that therefore he fought in the name of the human species. He had to fight Bolshevism and so on. That was the connection, So yes, he believed it. Not everybody, of course, in Germany believed it. The Catholics didn't believe it, the Protestants didn't believe it, but enough people to march with him. 4 million people from the present European Union, from the 28 states, they marched with him.
So, Dr. Siebert, at the end, can you tell me what your personal point of view about Theodicy itself? Especially you have a real catastrophe in your life with your life.
Yeah, right.
So how it's make people, what do you think the Theodicy itself again? It's make people believe or people reject God?
Well, first of all, I would say it is a struggle, It must be a struggle because you take seriously suffering, you take seriously evil, cancer, and so on, and what it does to your family. But I have described it all, the whole process, which I went through, and my Christian friends, my Jewish friends, my Islamic friends, we went through this, who knew us, And so there was, in my story, there was an aunt, and the aunt would say that Margie, my wife, had to die because I didn't let myself be ordained. And so this book has become very famous. When I taught at Oxford, people had read it and they were amazed that this retaliation Theodicy was still alive and so on.
Which book? Which the name?
It is From Critical Theory to Critical Political Theology, Personal Autonomy and Universal Solidarity. So it is the market. So it is the last chapter, and another one, the Critical Theory of Religion, is also the last chapter. So I have struggled with this, and you can go the negative way. That means to reject wrong answers. I don't think there's enough reason to apply the retaliation. She was a beautiful woman, she had her age shown, she was a very good mother, and so on. She played the organ in the church throughout her life, and so on, and led choirs, and so she led a very decent life. So that is out. A test. The question is who is to be tested, myself, the children, and so on. One could take that into consideration, and then one can have the hope, that these horrible things will not be the last in the historical process, So that means that ultimately the murderer will not triumph over its innocent victims. I think that is a very important sentence which I put up, that the murderer shall at least ultimately not triumph over his innocent victims, whoever the murderer may be.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. you.